has been one of the biggest objections that we get from skeptics, from atheists. Sometimes it's a genuine objection, sometimes it's not. But there's a lot of people who have real problems with this issue, and there's nothing wrong with feeling that way, as long as you're willing to work through it and you're open for answers. And hopefully this presentation will help some today with that. What's going on? Okay, there we go. The question is not just how did suffering come to be, but why does God continue to allow suffering? A lot of Christians know the traditional answer, well, free choice. That's why evil was allowed to come into the world. But a lot of Christians don't stop and ask the question, well, why is it that God is continuing to let it go on and on? Why doesn't he put a stop to it? Why didn't he put a stop to it real soon? How come we've had this Earth's history take place? So let's go back to the beginning, at the inception of sin, in the heart of the being that we now call Satan. We see in Ezekiel 28, verses 12 through 14, speaking of Lucifer, it says, "You were the model of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. You were anointed as guardian cherub, for so I ordained you." And then in Isaiah, we have a little description about when the evil first began to spring up in his heart. It says, "For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High." Now, Lucifer is wanting to be another god. Basically, he wants to take the place of God. So the battle for the throne of God is inevitable at that point. Some people ask the question, well, why did God create the devil? Like it's God's fault. I've heard this question asked a lot. Why did he create a being with the capability of rebelling? Which brings us to the concept of love. How many people here are familiar with this movie, Stepford Wives? Some people view that movie more favorably than others. There's also a Stepford Husbands movie for the ladies out there. The idea is there's this town of Stepford where the people who move there find that their wives, little by little, are being replaced by look-alike robots that do exactly what their husbands want all the time. And, there's an aspect to that which is, I better not get myself in trouble. But how meaningful would it be for your wife to, let's say, I baked you a pie, if she didn't have any choice in the matter? You just pulled out your little wife remote and beep, beep, beep. She brings you the remote. Brings you the pie. Love has to be freely given. Now, for love to be freely given, there has to be an alternative. So for obedience to God to mean something, it has to come from love, which means disobedience is an essential possibility in order for true righteousness to exist. This is a heavy concept, so I'm going to just go over it again. God did not create sin. He created the possibility for sin. Why would he create the possibility for sin? Because that is the other side of the coin to true righteousness. True righteousness is good. That means the possibility of sin is good. The possibility is good, but not the sin itself. Heavy concept. It's very, very important. There's a lot of Christians who go astray on that point. Well, non-Christians as well. So he never wanted us to take that option. God created angels perfect. But Satan chose to rebel against God. Now, a lot of people will ask a related question. They'll say, what made Satan sin? So let me just bring up a little scenario here for you. What if I'm sitting next to you and I smack you in the face? And you're like, oh, and you're kind of mad at me. You're like, why did you do that for? And then I explain. That's why I call it the circus. Then I explain my arm spasm. I had like a seizure kind of thing, my arm spasm, and it made my arm hit you in the face. Now, at that point, you wouldn't hold it against me anymore, right? You wouldn't say that what I did was evil. If sin was something that was predetermined, if we could say what made Satan sin, he wouldn't be responsible, would he? So you couldn't really call it evil. So the very nature of evil is such that it does not have an explanation in the sense of being able to say, this is what made Satan sin. It's going to remain a mystery. You're not going to have an explanation for it in that sense. Why didn't God just nuke Satan as soon as he sinned? Wouldn't we all be a lot better off, right? Okay. So picture that I'm the king of Camelot, and you're my kingdom, and you all love me. And then one day, my son here, Caden, he's my right-hand man. You all love him too. But one day he makes an accusation against me of some sort, and I chop his head off right away. Now, at this point, will you all serve me out of love? Will you tend to believe me that I'm innocent? Or will you think maybe I'm trying to cover up something and maybe there's some truth to his accusation, whatever he said? So if God had nuked Satan right away, then the universe would no longer serve God out of love. There would be some question as to whether Satan's depiction of God, his accusations, were really correct. So it was important then to allow Satan to further develop the principles of his government. Mind you, people, when they heard the word, I know they didn't use this English word evil, but when they heard this concept, they had a very vague idea of this. They didn't have a background. They didn't have things to associate with this. It was this concept of, really this would be a better way? And so to really see the nature of evil was necessary for people to make a free will decision. So in Revelation 12:7 it says, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels fought. So there was a battle in heaven, and some angels sided with Lucifer. It says the dragon and his angels fought. Okay, so this presupposes that there was some sort of a dispute. If some people are going to take Lucifer's side, that means there was some discussion that happened prior to this, right? Something, some platform. So here we have an old woodcut that I rather liked. It depicts Satan in the courts of heaven, and he's preaching his message of revolution to the angels, trying to get them to join his side. Now, how do you suppose he did this? Do you suppose he got together with some angels and said, hey, how about we get some suffering up here? How about we, gouge somebody's eye out or something? This isn't going to go over well, would it? No one would buy into that and say, yeah, that's what we need around here. We need some suffering. So we need to get a picture of what his, a little more hint at what his platform really was. What was his propaganda? Well, we see in Revelation that he's cast out of heaven. It says in Revelation 12:9, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So this sets the stage then. Lucifer's presence on earth is part of what brings about, well, helps to bring about the next situation here with Adam and Eve. God created the earth perfect. There was no killing. We read in Genesis that the animals were given every herb for food. They didn't kill each other. There was no suffering. Now, Satan could have said, if God had not allowed Satan to tempt Adam and Eve, what is God afraid of? Is he afraid people will see my way and know that I'm right? So, a loving God gave Adam and Eve the freedom to choose. He allowed Satan to share with them his platform. But he put some limitations here. He restricted the devil to one tree in the garden. The fruit wasn't poisonous, okay? This was like a voting booth in a sense. You can choose to obey God, or you can choose to disobey. So he tells them to stay away from this tree. He did everything he could to protect Adam and Eve from the tempter. But Eve entered Satan's ground, and there he tempted her. He says in Genesis 3:1, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So there's some implications here. Number one, God isn't who he claims to be. He is telling you stuff that's for a hidden purpose. His real motivation's a selfish one. And he's trying to keep you from a higher state of being. God knows good and evil, and he's trying to hold back this valuable knowledge that will make you like God. So once again, remember that Eve did not have a picture of suffering when she thought of evil. You have God's law, and this is like when we drive down the road. We don't particularly feel that the road is restricting our freedom, right? We drive on the road, we realize it facilitates our freedom. But if harmony was just all we knew, we wouldn't really stop and think about the idea of law as such. We would think of it as harmony. Now, Satan has brought up this idea that you don't have to do things God's way. God is actually repressing you. You don't realize it, but all this time you've been in blissful ignorance. You've been under oppression. God's been keeping you down, keeping you from becoming like him and having this knowledge of good and evil. Now, I want to just throw this in here about good and evil. It's true that we wouldn't know what to call good if it wasn't for evil. That doesn't mean that they're interdependent concepts, as I've heard many people suggest. There was, for instance, a time when cars had not been yet invented. And if you had mentioned that this was not a car and that was not a car, nobody would know what you were talking about. Everything is not a car, so it's kind of pointless to have the term. Well, everything was good back then. Once cars exist, we know what is not a car, right? So once evil exists, people know what's not evil. We know what good and evil is. Now, this knowledge did not bring happiness in a higher state of being, some kind of self-determination, angels' rights kind of deal for the angels that took Satan's side, where we can be a law for ourselves now and we don't need God's law for us. It brought suffering. The universe, though, would have to watch this develop, as we said, to understand more the nature of Satan's government. And it's not just evil on trial. You notice that there's accusations against God's character that he's really holding back something good, some kind of freedom from you. So really God is on trial here as well. John 8:44 speaks of Satan, says he is a liar and the father of it. I have a graphic here bringing to mind Eve taking that forbidden fruit. And by the way, the Bible doesn't say it's an apple. It just says it's a fruit. So we don't know really what kind of fruit it was. Self-deception is fundamental to moral evil. When you do something evil, profit motive, selfishness is your motive. You think you're going to gain something by it, but it's always the least profitable way in the end. This further illustrates the concept that self-deception is fundamental to moral evil. So the deception began inside her, and Satan appealed to the motivations in Eve that were like his own. Remember, he wanted to be like the Most High, and he tells her, you will be like God. So when sin took place, it brought about a drastic change to things. Romans 6:16 and 17 says, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one's slaves whom you obey? So we have this idea that Adam was given this dominion. And when he sinned, whose slave is he? Now his dominion belongs to his master. Now Satan is the ruler of the world at this point in the story. His dominion changes over to Satan's, and the world is in deep trouble. It's a planet in rebellion. Death comes about as the result of having withdrawn from the source of life, disconnected from it. We see the destructive force of nature, which we call natural evil. Tree falls on your house, that's bad. It causes suffering, but nobody did it to you on purpose. Natural evil. Cancer is natural evil. And moral evil. Adam also resulted from this. Adam and Eve now pass on their sinful tendencies that, when indulged, cause a great share of the suffering in our world today. So both forms of evil result from this change over to Satan's dominion. In Luke 3:38, we read a little something about the genealogy of Jesus. And I want you to notice something here. It says, so-and-so was the son of so-and-so, was the son of so-and-so. And finally it comes to this. It says, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. Now, you'll notice in Job chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, we have this sons of God thing mentioned. It says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth. Like there could be someplace else, possibly, right? Implication, maybe there's some other planets out there with intelligent life. And from walking up and down in it. Now, pay attention to this part right here. When in ancient Israel, when a person newly acquired a piece of land, they did something. They did something for a practical reason and a symbolic reason. They wanted to check out their land, but most likely they checked it out really before they bought it. They walked up and down, back and forth through it, to and fro, and up and down in it, as it says here, showing their claim to their land. So many people see in this a Hebraic expression of ownership, that Satan is saying, I've come from the earth, from my planet. So you have this idea that the sons of God, just like Adam was given the dominion of the earth and he was the son of God, that you have these people with different dominions throughout the universe that were coming together in this heavenly council, and Satan comes and says, and I've come to represent my world, my dominion. In Luke 4, we have the temptation where Satan is tempting Jesus. It says, and the devil, taking him up into a high mountain, showed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said unto him, all this power I will give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will give it. Whomsoever I will, I give it. So Satan here is saying just what we've been saying. He's confirming this. He says, this world is mine. It's been delivered unto me. How? Adam forfeited his dominion by sinning. Now it's been delivered unto me. This is my dominion, and I can give it to whoever I want. So this is how he's tempting Jesus. And the verse goes on, if thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine. But God refused to abandon humanity. Earth became wrapped in a dark shadow, but even though it says the wages of sin is death in Romans 6:23, would God destroy this planet that now deserved to die? Satan used the earth as Exhibit A in his argument against God's law. Satan said that the principle of the wages of sin is death. And you guys remember when we talked about the jurisdiction of the law? That's what the law does. It says you mess up, you die. This idea is violated by the concept of mercy. So either God's not merciful or he's not just. You see that? If God forgives Adam and Eve and lets them back, well then his law is not really absolute. He can just ignore it. You can take it or leave it. It's arbitrary, and it's not really this unalterable principle of harmony, this principle of life. By the way, it makes a lot of sense that the wages of sin is death, because the law is merely the way of harmony. The way of disharmony is death, kind of by definition. In fact, the word for evil in Hebrew, I won't roll the R for you, okay? It's ra. Literally, it's the word for decay, a descriptive picture of what evil does. So you picture, I remember when my son was real little, he used to watch one of those kid shows where it was Sid the Science Kid. And one of the little science kid topics there was decay. And they would show a time-lapse clip of a pumpkin decomposing. And the teacher would sing this little song about decay, But you would see this pumpkin, and you see it's composed. And you can imagine on a cellular level, you have all the order and structure there. And then as time goes by, that all breaks down. That's decay. That's evil. The breakdown of harmony, of balance. I say harmony and balance because when you have structure, you have the principle of balance. When you have gears meshing, every gear tooth moves out of the way in proportion to the next one moving into place. The concept of order is there demonstrated. So order and balance are philosophically related concepts. So this also sheds a little light on why, by the way, fermentation, which is a form of microbial degradation here, it's rotting, basically, is used often as a symbol in the temple services for evil also, by the way. So the wages of sin is death, but God is not going to destroy the planet. He's going to be merciful. But how? How is he going to be merciful without violating his justice? He withholds Satan from doing everything Satan would like to do. Satan would like to destroy us and cause all kinds of just unimaginable suffering and calamity, far more than we are experiencing. And God withholds him and defends his right to keep him from doing that on the basis that he's going to take the world back. He's going to prove his right by what he's going to do in the future. He gives us prophecy in Genesis 3 of the Messiah. One of the descendants of the woman would crush the serpent's head and would demonstrate the harmony between mercy and justice before the universe. Now that'd be a trick, wouldn't it? It's philosophically difficult to think of right away. At this point, the human race is receiving special protection based on what's going to happen in the future. The Messiah would come, and the Messiah would redeem the human race, would become the special focus of Satan's temptations in his life. He would pass the test that Adam and Eve failed, except much harder, because Satan's totally going to attack the Messiah. And he's not going to have any special advantages over us. He's going to do it, in fact, in the inherited weakness of that the human race has accumulated over many years of sinning. In Romans 1:3, concerning his son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, it says, which was made after the seed of David according to the flesh. Not special flesh. Hebrews 2:14 says, "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil." Now, there's a couple scriptures that have this same concept, but in historic Christianity, Gregory of Nazianzus established what for years was orthodoxy and now is kind of swept under the rug a little bit. But he enunciated this way. He says, "That which was not assumed was not redeemed." So, if Jesus did not have your flesh, then you're not redeemed. That's the concept here. Jesus chose not to exercise his omniscience. He was God. He had access to do that if he wanted to. That's why Satan, by the way, tempted him later to turn stones into bread. He never tempted me to do that because I can't do that, right? So he could access this power and make use of it, but he never did it on his own behalf. We see here that he lays aside his omniscience, and it says in Luke 2:52, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." This is necessary to be our substitute, that he really walked where we walked. Now, I want to point out something here. Adam and Eve, when they sinned, they forfeited their right to divine assistance. But Jesus, through living this perfect life as our substitute, and we'll talk about how the substitute thing works here in a minute, this allows us, when we're reckoned to have his perfect life, to have access to divine assistance. But we call that grace, because it's through him that we get that. Sanctifying grace, grace that helps you to overcome sin. So he relied on the Father for his power as an example to us, just like we have to rely. We can't rely on ourselves. We have to rely on divine power. We talked a little bit about this in my last sermon, this idea of having grace on credit. The people back in Earth's history, they had this grace on credit. In other words, Christ hadn't paid the price for it yet on the cross, but they were experiencing the same grace, saved the same way you and I are. They were just saved by what Jesus was going to do, whereas we're saved by what he has done. Now, in Job 1, let's go back to this and look at it real quick here. Remember when he asserted his authority over the earth? It was, and if you remember also in the story, God says in response to this, basically, have you seen my servant Job? You say everybody serves you, everyone's under your dominion. What about Job? Job is serving me. And so they developed this controversy. And the universe is watching. And so then Satan says, well, he serves you because you make life easy for him. Let me at him, and we'll see if he serves you. Let me make him suffer. And so God allows Job to suffer. And Job had no idea that in remaining faithful, even though he didn't have all the answers, in remaining faithful to God and trusting God, he was helping to defeat Satan in a cosmic argument going on. Now, your faith through hardship does the very same thing. It's important to keep that in mind. Someone asked, how does it even make sense for Jesus to take our place? Let's talk about the substitute thing a little bit. How can he die, take my punishment in my place? Well, that doesn't make sense for like one of you to take my place. It wouldn't be justice. But we have a bit of a unique situation here. Jesus in Colossians 1:16 is described this way. It says, for by him all things were created that are in heaven or that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. So he's the creator. This puts him in a very unique position. You see, if, this is not a perfect analogy, but if my dog bites someone, I can take responsibility. It's my dog, right? You can't take responsibility if my dog bites someone. That wouldn't make sense. Him being our Creator puts him in a position where only the Creator can take responsibility. This is why the religion of Arianism, this is the belief that Jesus isn't God, doesn't make sense. Jehovah's Witnesses, who believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, but he's not God, he's just a cosmic foreman. This doesn't make sense. Satan's argument that mercy and justice were contradictions were defeated here at the cross. Because justice was satisfied, right? But mercy was also shown. There was another thing done here. That was one of the major arguments that was being proven for the universe. But there's and by the way, here's a psalm, in Psalms 85:10, which describes that mercy and truth are met together, righteousness and peace have kissed each other. Satan was also fully unmasked. Up to this point, when anybody died, well, they deserved it, right? The wages of sin is death. This justification could not be made for the death of Christ that Satan was directly involved in. So he was really unmasked. Not only that, but the claims about God's character, was he actually selfish? Those claims were revealed as falsehood as well. Jesus did nothing to deserve this suffering. And, there's some aspects about his suffering that I think we need to dwell on just a little bit. He not only came down from the throne of the universe to the humble human form, which is an infinite condescension. He laid off his divine powers, the exercise of his divine powers, including his omniscience. And by the way, that had to be done in order to be tempted. Because remember we were talking about, and I wish I had time to expound on it more, this idea that self-deception is fundamental to moral evil. Can you be omniscient and self-deceived? You can't know all and also be self-deceived at the same time. So by Jesus not accessing his omniscience, he was allowing himself to be tempted. Okay, now think about this. We can't even fathom what would have happened had Jesus sinned. Because, remember, he could access his infinite powers. He was choosing not to. So, all we don't know whether the universe would implode. We don't know whether we would have an evil God somewhere. It's just unimaginable. But we do know this. All heaven was imperiled by this choice to come down and suffer, and we'll talk about that degree of suffering, and have a chance at redeeming you. By the way, just on the issue about how it's impossible to sin if you're omniscient, in Hebrews 6:18, it says that it was impossible for God to lie. In 1 John 1:5, it says, "This then is the message which you have heard of him, and declare unto you that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." So Jesus, he increased in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and man. So he's growing. He's developing his manhood within the boundaries of finite human abilities. And in so doing was imperiling the entire universe. This brings a little new meaning to when we read in Matthew 18, verse 11. "For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost." And then we'll keep reading here. "How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them go astray, doth he not leave the 99, and goeth into the mountains, and seeketh that which is gone astray? And if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost." That's even more than 99. It's a whole universe out there. He was putting on the line. He was saying, I'm not going to leave one behind. I'd rather destroy the whole universe than be without, and you can insert your name right there. The universe watched in amazement as Jesus endured a suffering beyond the depths of that imagination can reach. Now, this is far more than his physical suffering. And we can see it because it began even before his physical sufferings began. And it was so intense that he sweat blood through his skin. It says in Luke 22:44, and being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Now, we actually know from science that a person can, and not to this extent, I don't think we have any record of, but a person can actually, under great emotional stress, have blood, capillaries in the skin burst, and blood actually comes out with the sweat. Man, this was a lot. I mean, all over his body, probably his clothes were bloody from this bloody sweat. He was suffering to a degree that was only possible for one who was God. He was suffering multiple dimensions of infinity. All right, let's unpack that a little bit. I spent days trying to decide whether, could this really be that he even suffered an infinite amount, because that blew my mind. Infinite intensity of suffering. But he was suffering in proportion to the perfection of his holiness and his hatred of sin. You got that? He was suffering in proportion to the perfection of his holiness and his hatred of sin. And he was suffering that for every sin. In fact, in a little book called Education, it describes how that this was a revelation to our dull senses, the pain that has been felt by the heart of God since the inception of sin. But he was getting a lump sum here. He was suffering for every sin that ever happened and that every sin you might commit. So this is just incredible, hard to imagine. The universe saw as never before the selfless love of God, and Satan's assertions about God's character were obliterated. Death had no rights over Jesus. He had never sinned. The grave could not hold him, and he came forth to claim the prize he'd won at the cross. He had taken the dominion that Adam had lost back. This is why he's called the new Adam. 1 Corinthians 15, we read this starting in verse 21. I'll read through verse 23 and then verse 25.